this slide, the coast road runs through a magnificent, outstanding landscape. And in the south of Dorset, connecting an important community connection link between Weymouth and Bridport, and runs through a number of villages along. It's quite a busy road, although freight is recommended to be transported on the trunk roads alternative route. But occasionally it does go through. So it's in an outstanding location, and because of that, it was a good pilot, or a good candidate for a pilot under the Rural Roads Protocol project, which Alex and Magna have mentioned already, whereby different approaches to engineering and road management were being proposed that were more in keeping with the landscape of this nature and of this national importance. Once it had been accepted as a candidate, a large group was set up involving community representatives, councillors, engineers, and a representative of the Dorset area of Outstanding Tribute. We acted as a champion for an alternative approach to the engineering solutions on this road, and a small subgroup from that established, which enabled the Wide Open Spaces project to take on an important role in finding and resourcing Michael. So on that, I'll hand over to Michael to explain some of his design.
Hi, I'm Michael, and I was brought on to think about how we could slow down the traffic on this road where there'd been an awful lot of accidents, and also how this road could translate from a conduit to travel through to a space to enjoy and spend time in, because you've got these two different users of the area. You've got the people who are there, who are travelling through the area to look at it, as tourists do, so they're interested in the aesthetics of the landscape. And then you've got the people who are just commuting up and down the road, who obviously want to travel along it as fast as possible. So really I was looking at aesthetic conceits that would potentially raise the danger level of the road, and therefore slow down people's driving. I mean, particularly like in London now, that there's lots of rickshaws that cycle about and block the traffic and are very, very erratic. And then you add to that the Barclays or the Boris bikes, and you get all of these untrained cyclists now. They're just all over the place, moving very erratically. And it's really amazing that they've managed to get that scheme off the ground without people having to wear cycle helmets. So they look a lot more vulnerable in that position as well. So that also slows down the traffic. And something I do while I'm cycling as well is make sure I look like I'm slightly drunk, or I've never been on it before, and it really works well. You don't have the slick shirt on and the hat and everything and look really responsible. The best thing is kind of wiggle your legs about and almost fall off, and then the cars give you a really wide berth. So that was my kind of strategy around thinking about this road. And I wasn't thinking particularly about conceptual artwork. Some of them are, but I was also thinking about practical solutions that engineers may have thought of in their own time, but then not dare bring to the table at a meeting with. Because I'm an outsider, I'm allowed to say things that are potentially quite difficult and quite stupid. So this, for example, is a shadow on the road, and when I was looking at going down the road, there were beautiful shadows cast by the trees, and I thought, well, maybe we could just capture this and burn it into the road so I have a different colour tarmac. And you would have then not just this kind of false shadow, but you'd have a real shadow interacting with the false shadow. So at 1.1 second in the whole year, this shadow would align with the real shadow, but at other times it seemed like you're on some sort of planet with two suns. But you come over this hill and you start going down, and you could think it's an oil slick at the same time, an oil spillage. So again, you might swerve erratically in oncoming traffic, then we slow down because to avoid the collision, which is really kind of an ideal scenario for them. The other thing that I'm quite interested in, and I've worked with street furniture quite a lot in terms of my kind of sculptural works, is how we can simplify those forms. And this has been done a lot in cities in terms of really obvious things like sticking traffic lights on street lights. And then, that happens on High Street, Kensington, for example, but most of the rest of Britain, it doesn't happen. They stick traffic lights, one foot from a street light, one foot from another sign, and it goes on until you have this huge cluster of signs. But in terms of applying that sort of methodology to the rural setting was interesting. So I quite like these, I'll need a road engineer to tell me what they're called again, these chevrons, that's it. I like chevrons, but the trouble is they're all on these kind of big steel panels, and I thought, well, maybe you could just build them into the fencing that already exists. So what we have here is just your standard wooden fence, and then you put in two other struts and then paint them white, and they just kind of integrate with the fencing that's there. And at night time, if that paint is a bit reflective, then you pick up the chevrons when you need them, and in the daytime when you can see the road anyhow, they just disappear into the fence. So not exactly an artwork, but a kind of interesting attempt at simplifying what happens in this area. Now I'm trying to remember what this one is about.
Slow race.
Slow race, that's it. I did this so long ago now. This is what happens. You do these things. Yeah, this is something I've been quite interested in as well, is the idea of having competitions. Normally I worked on a piece working with the Tour de France, and I thought of turning this around another way and actually having the slowest cycle race in the world. And there's apparently a small village in the States that does this. They have the slowest manpower vehicle race, but there's no such example of such a thing in Europe. And I thought, well, this would be a good opportunity, that we shut down the road for about a week or 2 weeks, and then have this slow cycle race between the towns. I mean, really, really slow. So you'd have cogs on the back wheel that are about that big to make sure you could go slow enough. And then, of course, when you fall over, then you're out. So well, that seemed like a good idea as well. This is going back to the simplification again of the street furniture, where I noticed that again you have a lot of fencing, and then you have these, what are these called? I've forgotten what they're called. Bollards. Well, they are kind of bollards, with those reflective stripes on them. And they work in parallel. So again, and a lot of this comes down to things that were talked about earlier, but land ownership. It's easier because the council own the land next to the road, but not the fence. It's easier to build two sets of things than negotiate with the landowner changing their fence posts. And I suppose this is why we end up with a lot of street clutterness, because the negotiation takes far longer than the fabrication of new material. But then that is not a particularly ecological stance, because then you're having for decades to maintain 2 or 3 parallel sets of street furniture when you could only have one. The other thing, of course, there's always ongoing roadworks. And I thought, well, we are in the countryside, so rather than having traffic cones, what about making them into nice kind of flower pots? Just have, nice trees and all vegetation that stops you going into where the roadworks are, but is aesthetically more in keeping with the surroundings. And then this one was just this idea of putting a finishing line there with all the flags and all the accessories, but not have any race at all. We just have this finishing line that we move up and down the road and turns up on days like a Wednesday in June and then on a Sunday in August, you never know where it's going to turn up. But again, as you're driving around, you would expect that around the corner, suddenly 300 runners are going to descend on you. So you just think that's going to be the case, so you slow down. And I mean, this would cost hardly anything to put together, and just put, you unplug it, take out the van, set it up, and then take it away again. This is a piece that out of all the pieces, this is a piece that I really wanted to do. So, this is there's many locations where people have had serious accidents and died on the boat. And something that's happened, particularly in London, is that where cyclists have been killed, people lock up bicycles and paint them white. And then they just stay there forever. So, in fact, London just gets more and more populated with white bicycles. And it's something that's done more formally in France, where people have been killed. You put up a sign with a black person, and that's actually the people responsible for the roads who do that. But I thought it'd be interesting to perhaps get like 20 locations where people have died and put crashed cars there, but painted white. So the whole thing is painted white, including the glass. And just keep them there for 2 or 3 weeks and then take them away again. And I think that as a sculptural form against this kind of green, luscious landscape, it would produce an amazing kind of aesthetic image, as well as, of course, slow down the car drivers. And then as a legacy, you'd be left with photographs of these images. I mean, both photographs that I would take, and also photographs that people take as they stop and just take a snapshot of it, and then that ends up on Flickr and it's circulating around the kind of Web2 community of images. And that way it promotes the Dorset Coast Road as a place to go, but it also stimulates the debate around motorised transports and the dangers that are inherent with